Hi guys, so today I wanted to film a video about 1984 by George Orwell. The reason I wanted to film this video is because I read George Orwell's book last month in February and I finally got why everyone is going so crazy for it right now. I finally understand why it's sort of having this second life and it's become a bestseller again and everyone's talking about it. It's worth the hype. It is actually that important. And I really enjoyed reading it because I felt like I learned something about how society operates and what is important in society if we want it to work. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. The most important themes for me that stood out. I mean, there's a lot of themes, there's a lot going on in 1984, but I wanted to talk about what stood out for me, what made me think, and what made me realise why 1984 is so important. I don't have my copy on me. I filmed these videos at my dad's and my copy is at my house where I live with my boyfriend, so I should have brought it but I didn't. Anyway, you would have seen a copy of it in a previous wrap-up, but I don't think that matters. Let's talk about the book and the themes and why it's important, and if you were thinking about reading it this year, why you should definitely pick it up. First, let's set the scene a bit. So 1984 is about a man called Winston Smith who works for the Ministry of Truth in this totalitarian government system where everyone is watched all the time and everything is controlled by a man called Big Brother and his sort of cabinet, and everyone else has to do what they're told and be really patriotic, and they're not allowed to even think something against the system or think something that would be considered unpatriotic or negative in any way relating to Big Brother or the system that they live under. Now, Winston has started to have these thoughts about why he thinks the system isn't working, and he started to write these thoughts down, and he knows that just by doing that he is putting himself at risk for torture and potential death, and he knows he shouldn't be doing it but he sort of can't help himself, and then he embarks on an affair with another ministry worker called Julia, who has similar ideas to his own, if they're maybe not as well crafted, and the story goes from there. What I will say is that this book does not read like a novel to me. It doesn't read like a story. To me, Winston and Julia's relationship is very almost incidental. It doesn't seem to matter all that much. It's more about what George Orwell is saying and the commentary he's making. So to me, 1984 reads more like political theory than it does a novel, and that I think is why I struggle with it so much. The first time I tried to read it when I was sort of 14, 15 and couldn't really get into it and didn't enjoy it because the narrative is quite weak and quite minimal in comparison to the commentary. So I go into it with that knowledge in mind and just keep that in mind. Know that you're not really reading a novel here. It's not going to be your typical novel reading experience. It's political theory, but I found it much easier to read being a little bit older, being at university, being more politically aware. That definitely helped me read the book and take everything in. So maybe just go into it in that mindset that if you're finding it a bit hard going, it's probably because of the political theory side of it, and you'll probably find it easier if you've tried to read it before and you're a bit older now and a bit more politically aware. You'll definitely find it easier the second time round. Now, the themes that stood out for me, or why I think 1984 is so relevant right now. So, Winston works for something called the Ministry of Truth, and his job is to basically alter the past to suit the present. So, for example, Winston lives in Oceania, and Oceania throughout history is sort of alternatively at war with Eurasia or East Asia, and Winston's job is to alter all the newspapers, books, articles, anything written about the war to say who they're currently at war at. Not who they were at war at then, but to make it look like they were always at war with the same person. And he basically alters the past in every sense. If somebody falls out of favour or comes into favour, he changes articles to make it look like they were always in favour or always out of favour. So essentially, the population has to live in the state of almost mild insanity where nothing is true and nothing is permanent because everything is subject to change. And that, I thought, was fascinating. Orwell based that on Stalin's Russia because Stalin used to airbrush people out of images or airbrush them into images based on who was in favour, who was out of favour, and who he wanted to be a part of history and who he didn't want to be a part of history. And I'm doing a course in university that talks a bit about that and talks about the use of images throughout history and the use of film history, paintings, all those sort of things, how they contribute to history. And a big thing that keeps getting talked about is social media and the fact that we have the power to create history all of the time. So we are fed images all of the time, and we have to ascertain all the time what we are being fed, because we can curate what we want on social media, and the media itself can say what they want. They can make images look how they want. They can tailor things so they fit a certain angle or take a certain slant. It puts me particularly in mind of the fact that on our Instagram accounts, we don't really show our full lives. We show what we want to show. So we don't see a full picture, and that's true of absolutely every image. You read a newspaper article and the images attached to that article have been chosen specifically to send a certain message. So 1984, I think, will continually be relevant because of that, because it brings up this nature of what are you being shown, what are you being told, and what do you know to be true? What do you find out when you dig a little deeper, and why you should dig a little deeper instead of accepting everything at face value. It's more relevant now, actually, I think, than when Orwell wrote it, which is crazy, because obviously Orwell didn't have social media. There was no Instagram or Facebook. There weren't even mobile phones. So we've come so far with technology, which is great, but we now have Orwell's world on an even bigger scale, poses an even bigger challenge, the constant need to think about what are we being fed, what are we being told, what do people want us to think, versus what's actually true. Beyond that, I was really fascinated by Orwell's descriptions of how this totalitarian government keeps people under their control, and really they do it by making sure that education is very limited, by making sure that people's basic needs are met, and then telling people they don't have a cause to complain because they've got the basics, and by keeping everyone in a state of constant hatred. So keeping everyone really hyped up, hating the enemy, instead of noticing what's happening at home. And all those things struck a chord for me in terms of what happens in the world all over, in different places and at different times. The fact that there are governments who want their people to be uneducated so they can't question them. And there are governments who will make you feel crazy if you ask for more than just the very basics, if you say you want more of your rights. If you demand more of your rights as a person and as an individual. And so often we see misdirected hatred. Instead of being able to focus on the actual issues, we other various groups and we direct our aggressions at them. And that's of course really negative and based on miseducation and a lack of education, because it's not given to us, because actually some people want us to direct our aggressions at people who aren't the issue, so that we don't look at the actual issue. And it's really interesting that Orwell hit on that, and that I still see it in the world, because 1984, it's considered a classic. It's not something that was written like last year, but I look at it and I see what governments try and do, and not all governments and not all of the time, but I still see the same trends throughout various parts of society. And I think that's really useful for us, because the point of a dystopian novel is to take aspects of our society and pull it out so that it distorts enough so that we know our society doesn't quite look like that yet, but we're aware of where our society could go if we don't pick up on what the problems are. So particularly in this sense, Orwell's drawing a lot of attention to what does the government do? Are we actually focusing on the real problems? Are we actually focusing on what the government is or isn't doing? And are we getting ourselves educated? Are we making sure that we know what our rights are? We know they're beyond just, basic food and water. We know that it's more than that. We know there's a lot of human rights involved, and there's a lot of... By the way, sorry if you can hear a dog sniffling. She's flopping around on the carpet. Anyway, we know that our human rights are bigger than our basic needs. It's about being respected and having freedoms to express ourselves as we want to and as we see right, and having the freedom to decide who we want in our government and if they're representing our needs. And it's quite big in that in 1984, they're trying very hard to suppress all human emotion. They're trying to turn people into these machines of hatred where all they feel is hatred. They don't feel sexual desire or love or kindness. It's all about hatred towards the enemy, and then the only love that you're allowed to have is love for the party and Big Brother and the sort of hyped up patriotism. And I read a book a while ago for my history degree by a guy called Ferdinand Mount. It was called The Subversive Family, and it was about how the family is the most subversive unit because you cannot control what two people say alone at night in bed together. You cannot control what thoughts they hatch up, and if they're criticizing the government or not, you can't control that. And it's so important that we maintain those relationships if that's the case. If just being a part of a family unit, whatever shape or form that takes, just by having closeness and intimacy with people in our lives, we retain this power, because what we say between us and what we feel between us cannot be controlled, and we retain a sense of individuality in that unit because we can express ourselves, and that extends more widely into how we can express ourselves when it comes to government and the wider world, and how we're being represented and who is controlling how our lives get lived and if they're the right person to be doing that. So really for me, 1984 brought up the issues of social media, the image, what we're being fed. It brought up the issues of what is our government doing and how can we improve on that? How can we speak out against that instead of just accepting whatever the bare minimum is and going, oh well, we don't have any power, we can't do anything else, but instead speaking out and going, wait a minute, that's not right, we deserve more than that, and making sure that that's delivered. And it really highlights for me the importance of interpersonal relationships in the family unit, in relationships, in friendships, but maintaining our strength by maintaining connections, so that there is never an occasion where a singular party can go, you're going to do this now, and you're going to have no one to rely on. I really wish that 1984 talked about how the world got into that state, and dystopias don't tend to do that. They don't tend to track the world from it is now to how it gets to the dystopian state. And I wish 1984 did that, because I struggle to understand how some of the characters in 1984 can accept how the world is, and how people ever accepted things going so wrong in the first place. But then again, this is the problem of silence and silencing voices, and I understand that many people in society are taught that they don't have a voice, but we do. We have this voice and we get to use it. And really, 1984, I think the reason it's become so relevant now is because, for me, it said why we must use our voices and why we must be aware of what we deserve and speak out more for it on our own behalf, and then also on behalf of the people who feel they don't have voices but have the same human rights as us, which is everybody. So that was kind of my takeaway from the book, and there's a lot more in there. It's a very, very rich book in terms of politics and the way the world works, and I can't remember all of it. I probably should have written more of it down, but those are my main takeaways. Those are the things that have kept playing on my mind as I've thought about the book since I finished it, and I've thought about it a lot. I think that it's great that it's having this sort of second revival, or maybe more than a second revival, but it's having this revival right now where lots of other people are reading it and talking about it and discussing these themes and where we don't want the world to be. Because also what struck me about 1984 is that no one is happy. Even the people high up aren't happy, because they're also living in the state of constant hatred and fear and anger. And that's not a nice place for anybody to be living, even if you're at the very top. And I hope that if you're going to pick up a classic this year, you pick up 1984. Not many classics, in my opinion, are worth actually reading. Normally I'm in favour of just watch the BBC adaptation, but I think in the case of 1984, it's definitely worth picking up and sort of keeping these general themes in mind about what you're being fed, what your government is actually providing you with, what you deserve, and the nature of maintaining interpersonal relationships and being able to use our voice and express ourselves. So I think I've rambled for long enough. This probably hasn't been the most academic video, but it was just some thoughts that I had and some things I've been thinking about. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've maybe decided that you're going to give 1984 another go if you've read it before, or give it a go for the first time, or reread it even if you read and loved it before. It's pertinent, it's real, and I hope you decide to go there. I think I'm going to wrap it up now because I'm getting a bit hyped and a bit... ugh. Okay, I'm going to go. Have a really great day. Go read good books. I'll see you soon. Bye!